You know, there's a word in the Quran that holds a powerful, almost forgotten meaning. Let's dive in.
The root word for witness. It shows up 160 times. Yeah, it's a pretty central idea.
But here's the thing. The argument is that its true active meaning has been lost over time.
So how does the Quran tell us to understand the world? It actually lays out a super clear two-part system.
It splits everything into the unseen, which is about faith, and the witnessed, which is for us to explore. But this simple two-part system got complicated. A third element was added, and it kind of messed things up.
That element is Zan, basically just guesswork, and it distorted the whole idea of knowledge. Because of this, some really key concepts started to lose their original, more dynamic meanings.
Take kashif, or discovery. It went from being about scientific exploration to just mystical insight.
But the biggest change? Well, that happened to the word for the witness itself, shahid.
We usually think of shahid as a martyr, right? But its Quranic meaning is actually a living witness. And get this, the Quran calls God, the prophets, and even angels witnesses. Pretty amazing.
So why the change? Well, the argument is it was political. Empires needed soldiers, right?
Okay, so if our job is to be a living witness, what does that actually mean for us?
It means our role is to observe and understand the world, not to judge it.
A story about the Prophet Muhammad just nails this point perfectly.
That one question is a timeless warning. We can never truly know what's in someone else's heart.
So being a witness isn't a passive thing at all. It's about actively and consciously engaging with everything.
You need to be aware, deeply curious, and have the integrity to see things as they really are.
When you look at it this way, science and exploration become the highest forms of witnessing.
So it leaves us with a fundamental choice. Are you here to judge, or are you here to witness? Because in the end, we're not here to own the world. We're here to witness it.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful lecture that completely re-examines a core concept you find all over the Quran. So get this. The root word for witness, it shows up in the Quran about 160 times. I mean, that number alone should tell you something, right? This is a huge deal. Well, according to the thinker Mustafa Islamalu, the answer is this incredible call for scientific discovery and ethical living. It's a really dynamic meaning that he argues has just been tragically lost over time. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll build the foundation of the whole idea. Then we'll see how it got changed, look at the consequences, and finally figure out what our true role is supposed to be. Okay. So first things first, we have to get a handle on the Quran's core philosophy of knowledge. You know, its epistemology. Islamul argues that this one verse, this is it. This is the pillar of the entire Quranic knowledge system. And it's a system that stands firmly on two legs. So you can see here, this lays out the perfect balance at the very heart of this worldview. You've got two sides. On one, there's the ghaib, the unseen, that's the realm of faith. And on the other, you have shahadat, the seen. This is the entire observable universe, the world of knowledge, exploration, and discovery. So, what happens when this perfect two-legged balance gets broken? Well, that's exactly where the problem starts. Just think about it, a balanced system, totally strong and stable. It's like a person standing firmly on 2 feet. You've got faith in one realm, and you've got scientific knowledge in the other. Perfectly balanced. But here's the twist. Islamalu argues that over time, tradition came along and added this wobbly prosthetic third leg. It's called zan, and it's basically just conjecture, opinion, guesswork. And tacking that on, it completely destabilized the whole structure. See, when you start injecting guesswork into things that are supposed to require either firm faith or actual verifiable knowledge, the whole system just gets thrown off balance. And according to him, this is the point where the deviation really began. And this wasn't just some abstract philosophical problem. This imbalance had huge real-world consequences. Because as this idea of conjecture took hold, some really essential concepts started to lose their original, powerful Quranic meaning. I mean, just take the word for witnessing itself, shahadat. It had this grand, incredible meaning, a call to explore and understand all of reality, and it got shrunken down into just a little physical gesture you do in prayer. Islamoglu even tells this crazy story about seeing a literal fistfight break out in a mosque over the correct way to move your finger during this ritual. They were completely missing the cosmic point. And it happened with other words too. The word keshif, which means discovery, it stopped being about scientific breakthroughs and inventions. Instead, it got pushed into the realm of like mystical acts and magic tricks. You know, like pulling a rabbit out of a hat? But this next one is maybe the most crucial of all, the term shaheed. In the Quran, this word is used for God, for prophets, for angels. It's meant to describe a living witness, an active model of faith. But its meaning got completely twisted, completely flipped, to mean someone who is dead, a martyr. And you know, this kind of massive shift in meaning, it doesn't just happen by accident. Islamolu suggests this was a deliberate change. It likely happened during the Umayyad dynasty, a time when the state desperately needed an ideology that would encourage men to go die in its military campaigns. The meaning was changed to serve a political purpose. Okay, so if all these fundamental words have been so completely misunderstood, what's our role supposed to be in all of this? Where do we fit in? Well, to get a handle on it, just picture a courtroom, right? There are basically 3 fundamental roles you can play. So the idea here is that the Quran's constant, relentless emphasis on witnessing is a profound directive. It's asking you to actively choose the role of the witness. And by making that choice, you consciously avoid the other 2 roles. You are not the judge, and you are not the accused. Your job is simply to observe. And this idea, this refusal to judge, it's captured perfectly in this one incredibly powerful story. A follower kills an enemy in battle right after the enemy declares his faith at the very last second. And the Prophet Muhammad rebukes him, asking this absolutely penetrating question. Did you open his heart to see? The point is you can't know another person's inner reality, so your role can't be to judge. And all of this, everything we've talked about, it leads us to the final central message of this whole perspective. The entire argument really gets summed up in this one powerful statement. Our purpose here isn't to possess or control or own the world around us. It's to observe it, to understand it, and to bear witness to it. But it's really important to get this. Being a witness is not a passive thing at all. It's an incredibly active state. It requires your full awareness, your curiosity, your honesty. It means engaging your mind, all your senses, and your conscience. It's a total conscious engagement with reality. So, that leaves us with one final powerful question to really think about. You are a witness to your time, to your world, to your own life. So if your very existence is your testimony, what story is it going to tell?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We often talk about knowledge as a collection of facts, but today we're diving into a concept so foundational that our sources argue it's the blueprint for how we should acquire and verify all knowledge, and, importantly, how we should ethically live. If you've ever felt like the basic definition of a religious or philosophical term just doesn't capture its real power, this deep dive is, well, it's your necessary shortcut.
We are undertaking a deep, complex, and frankly, a revolutionary task today.
Yeah.
Our source material isn't just an interpretation. It's really a structural deconstruction of a single monolithic concept, Shahadah.
Right. And when most people hear Shahadah, they immediately think of the declaration of faith, the ritual statement.
That's it. But that is just the tip of an iceberg that encompasses theology, epistemology, law, and ethics. It's so much bigger.
That's right. Our mission here is to move far beyond that ritual and extract why Shahadah, this act of witnessing or testimony, is, according to these sources, the very mechanism of knowledge and really the backbone of ethical living.
And critically, we need to trace exactly how and why its original profound meaning was, in the source's own terms, radically corrupted over time.
Okay, so to get a sense of the scale here, where do we start?
Well, to understand the colossal weight of this concept, let's start with a statistic that should, stop you in your tracks. The root word, shahidah, meaning to witness or to testify, appears approximately 160 times in the core text.
160 times. That's monumental.
It is. That's a recurring central theme. It's not a supporting element. It's a main structural beam of the entire edifice.
That frequency suggests this isn't just a human responsibility. It sounds more like an inherent principle of reality itself. And what's fascinating to me is that the concept applies to the divine.
Exactly. The source material highlights that the concept is so central that Allah is referred to by the name Shaheed, the witness, 20 separate times.
Okay, but we can't just translate this as God as a witness and move on, can we? There has to be more to it.
So much more. We really need to unpack the linguistic weight here. When the source describes Allah as Shahid, it invokes a dual linguistic power. It acts as the ismi fail, which is the active subject, the one who witnesses, the observer.
The one doing the seeing.
Right. But critically, the source notes that the density of this concept also contains the essence of the ismi full, the object, the reality that is being witnessed.
Wait, so it's not just that God observes everything, but that God is the observed reality at the same time.
Concisely. If God is the ultimate witness, the ismi fail, then God's unlimited infinite presence and reality become the very thing that is eternally observed, the ismi full.
Wow.
It highlights God's absolute completeness, limitless in observation, and limitlessly real. This profound duality means that the highest form of witnessing is not merely seeing an external object, but participating in the complete reality of existence, which is itself the ultimate infinite witness.
Okay. And this is where the source material makes its most challenging proposal, right? This sets the stage for everything else we're going to discuss today.
It really does. Traditional theological systems, what the source sometimes calls Muslim theology, to distinguish it from the core framework of Islam, they often try to start with the absolute, with God.
Which seems logical. You'd think you'd start at the top.
It seems logical, but our sources suggest this is methodologically impossible for the finite human being.
You can't grasp the infinite.
You can't. If we want to build a genuine framework of understanding, knowledge, and action, we cannot begin with the absolute because it is, by definition, beyond our comprehension. The human intellect cannot ascend or rise to the absolute, or rus edemes, as the source puts it.
So where do we start?
We must instead begin with the created realm, the malukat, which includes ourselves, the earth, the entire universe. This necessary starting point, the observable, is what defines Shahadah as a human mandate.
That sounds like a radical inversion for a religious study. Instead of starting with what God is, we're told to start with what the universe is and what we are.
Exactly.
And this sets us up perfectly for our first major section, the two pillars of knowledge. So let's unpack the source material's pretty sharp critique of historical theological development. They argue that much of what became accepted Muslim theology, the institutionalized, systematized thought, was actually imported, ithal idildi.
Yes, imported from neighboring religious and philosophical traditions. And the central concern of the source is that this importation brought in methodological dirty debris.
Dirty debris, that's a strong phrase.
It is. By starting with the infinite and trying to deduce the finite historical theology, ended up compromising the clear stream of understanding that flows from the core text. They were using a methodology designed to discuss the boundless and applying it to the bounded human condition and the finite universe.
Which fundamentally compromises the architecture of how we acquire knowledge. You just can't use an infinite lens to look at a finite object and expect accurate results.
Exactly. So the source insists that true Quranic epistemology requires a two-legged structure, like a human body that stands strong and stable on 2 points. If we strip away that imported debris, what are those two essential pillars?
The Gehaib and the Shahadah. Let's define those clearly for everyone listening.
So first you have Gehaib, which is the unseen or the absolute. This is the realm of the infinite, the limitless. It is completely beyond human capacity to grasp, to test, to touch, or, process in any empirical way.
So we can't put it under a microscope.
Not at all. And since our finite intellect cannot ascend to it, our engagement with Haib can only be through iman, or faith. This is the pillar of conviction.
Okay, so that's one pillar. What's the second?
The second is Shahadah, the witnessed or the observable. This is the entire created realm, this room, this city, our galaxy, the entire universe, the Alam. This is the starting point for human understanding. It is the pillar of empirical, verifiable knowledge.
That makes the structure so clear. You need both to stand. So if Hayhaib is beyond our direct comprehension, then even the concept of revelation, of Vahi, must respect that boundary. It can't just deliver infinite knowledge into a finite container.
Precisely. The source describes Vahi not as direct spoken dictation, but rather as ima, which is a suggestion, and ishrat, a signal or a sign.
So it's pointing the way.
It's pointing the way. Revelation signals the path for us to follow, but it doesn't force the climb. Think of it like a beacon on a distant shore. It guides the ship, but the crew still has to navigate the waters themselves. The sign is something we can process and act upon, respecting the fact that the human intellect cannot reach the infinite.
But here's where the traditional system, in the source's critique, completely broke down. Instead of staying a strong two-legged structure of gaib and Shahadah, it tried to introduce a third corrupting element.
Yes, they attempted to introduce a prosthetic third foot, Zen, which translates as conjecture or opinion.
A prosthetic foot, I like that analogy.
Well, the source describes this as a fundamental compromise of the anatomy. A two-legged stance is stable and powerful. If you add a weak, unnecessary third leg, you don't increase power, you just introduce wobble, weakness, and confusion.
It immediately draws a parallel for me to ancient Greek philosophy, right? The distinction between episteme, which is verifiable knowledge or science, and aligns with Shahadah and doxa, which is opinion or conjecture, aligning with Zen. Our sources are very clear that this third element, Zen, contains nothing of hakikat, of ultimate truth.
This is a profound epistemological distinction. We have to recognize that Zen is not knowledge, it is speculation. Now, to be fair, we should acknowledge that the Quran sometimes uses Zen in a positive sense. For example, when believers hold the strong Zen or conviction that they will meet their Lord, that's a powerful, deep belief concerning the gaib.
But the moment you try to use that belief about the gaib as verifiable knowledge about the Shahadah, that's when the corruption sets in.
Exactly that. Concepts like the afterlife, ahiret, are absolutely in the realm of gaib. We can have strong conviction Zen in that positive sense that they exist, but we cannot have verifiable knowledge or Shahadah of them.
So what does that mean for how we read texts about the afterlife?
It means, the source insists, that any description of the afterlife in the revealed texts must be understood as mekaz, or metaphorical. It is attempting to describe an entirely different dimension, a world of gaib, using the limited vocabulary and sensory data of this dimension, the Shahadah.
So when we stop recognizing that boundary and mistake our strong opinion, our zan, for absolute fact, we compromise both science and faith.
It creates a crisis of intellectual integrity. And this brings us to one of the source's most crucial and controversial points, the distinction between the fundamental framework of din and the cultural products that arose from it.
Okay, let's talk about that. We mentioned elements like hadith, the sayings and traditions, and fiqh jurisprudence. The source classifies them as components of Muslim culture and historical cultural products. But for many listeners, those elements are the framework of the religion. Can we explore that nuance?
Yes, this requires some sensitivity and precision. The source is not dismissing the value of hadith or fiqh. It is placing them in their proper epistemological category. They are cumulative, they are produced by Societotoplumen Uretiiter, and therefore they are subject to human context, fallibility, and historical revision.
They are the products of human effort to interpret the two divine pillars.
Exactly. Unlike din, which is the core, two-legged, divinely established structure. And din itself, the source stresses, is peace, it is action, it is morality, and it is living peacefully. It should not produce wordsmiths, Suzelchi Urupmemeli. It should produce moral actors.
Action over discourse.
Yes. If you confuse the cultural product with the divine source, you become trapped in endless discourse, soilem, instead of producing ethical action, ilem. The Day of Judgment itself validates this. The source reminds us of the image where our mouths are sealed and our hands speak and our feet testify. The actions themselves provide the Shahadah. The actions speak louder than the soilem.
That's a powerful point to end on. If the entire created universe is the realm of Shahadah, the observable, the witnessable, then that realm isn't just something to be passively accepted, it must be actively investigated.
Right.
And this shifts our focus to section 2, the command to discover. The very name of the universe implies this mandate.
This is a powerful linguistic claim made by the source. The term alam, meaning universe or world, is traced to be linguistically linked to alam knowable. If the universe is the alam, then it is inherently knowable. It's an open book, not a closed mystery.
That's a radical idea because it reframes the relationship between humanity and nature. The universe isn't some distraction from the divine. It is a sign of the divine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the source also connects alam to visible markers, flags, mountain peaks, minarets, the things that stand out, the visible signs. Similarly, concepts like Arif and Urf relate to the highest, most visible points. The universe is designed to be a clear divine flag. It's meant to be observed, understood, and mapped with precision.
So Shahadah transforms from merely seeing to actively engaging in keshaf discovery and exploration. It becomes a divine invitation.
It becomes a lifelong mandate. Since the universe is inherently knowable, the act of Shahadah demands keshaf, the rigorous, diligent investigation of the created realm. And this, unfortunately, forces us to ask the painful question, what is the historical Muslim report card on fulfilling this mandate of Kishif.
And according to the sources, the results are, well, underwhelming to say the least. We've had only what they term 1.5 historical periods of great discovery.
It shows that the scientific spirit was transient, not persistent. The 2 periods cited were the Mamun period in the 8th century and then the Buwayhid period in the 10th century. These were brief windows when curiosity and empirical observation were prioritized over dogma and discourse.
But during those brief times, the output was incredible.
It was. During these periods, the Muslim world produced intellectual giants who truly adhered to Shahadah as an epistemological guide. These were the figures who built the bridges to the modern world.
People like al-Khwarizmi and al-Battani.
Think of al-Battani, whose astronomical work corrected Ptolemy's findings and later influenced Copernicus. Or al-Khwarizmi, who gave us the concept of zero and systematized algebra, creating the very algorithm that drives modern logic. And we must certainly mention Jabir ibn Hayyan, often credited as the father of chemistry.
Let's focus on Jabir ibn Hayyan for a moment, because his integrity provides the perfect model of scientific Shahadah, witnessing the truth of observable reality, no matter the external pressure.
Jabir was operating during a very difficult cultural transition in the 8th century. Scientific inquiry, philosophy, mysticism, things like alchemy. They were all deeply mixed together. Many of his contemporaries, who were otherwise brilliant chemists, were also steeped in the idea of turning lead into gold. Alchemy.
The magical thinking.
The magical thinking. Yet our sources reveal that in his written treatises, Jabir ibn Hayyan argued vehemently against alchemy, which he labeled as sateh bilim, or false science.
That must have required immense intellectual courage and clarity at that time.
It did. He was drawing a clear line in the sand, witnessing to the empirical truth, the verifiable reality, even if it meant rejecting the popular magical notion of the impossible. His commitment was to chemistry, the science of what is, over alchemy, the pursuit of what cannot be witnessed. This is scientific integrity as a form of Shahadah.
So if this foundation was so strong, and the mandate for Kishuf was divinely encoded in the universe's very name, why did this discovery stagnate after the 10th century? What was the conceptual rot that set in?
The rot, according to the sources, was the fundamental corruption of the concept of Kishuf itself. Instead of being about rigorous empirical exploration, it was twisted into keramet.
And keramet means miracle or charisma.
Yes. The source defines keramet in this context as pulling a rabbit out of a hat. The idea that understanding comes via supernatural intervention, not effort. If the highest form of understanding the universe discovery is viewed as something magical that bypasses observation, then curiosity dies. If knowledge is a sudden flash of divine grace, why would you bother with the diligence of the witness, with the lab work, or the meticulous mathematics?
That is a stunning diagnosis of stagnation. The corruption of a single concept discovery becoming miracle killed centuries of scientific inquiry.
And this conceptual flattening extended to fundamental religious practices as well. It transformed core ideas like tasbih and zikr into empty rituals, which further compromised the life of the witness.
Okay, let's look at tasbih, glorification. How has the source redefined this beyond the usual image we have of rotating prayer beads?
The Quranic principle is that nothing exists that does not glorify God. So if a rock glorifies God simply by existing as a rock, then for the human being, the product of divine R&D, tasbih, cannot be a mere verbal or mechanical act.
It has to be more.
It must mean acting in total accordance with one's intended purpose of creation. A scientist performs tasbih by conducting honest kishuf. A moral actor performs tasbih by acting justly. If you reduce that cosmic mandate to just beads, the source says you remain lifelong deprived of tasbih because you've missed the profound instruction to fulfill your potential.
And zikr, or remembrance, suffered a similar fate.
Absolutely. Zikr is not an ain, a fixed ritual ceremony involving sitting and chanting. The Quran itself is called zik. Is the Quran a ritual ceremony? No, it's the guidance for life. If these central concepts, discovery, glorification, remembrance, are reduced to empty, repetitive motions, the intellectual and spiritual life they were meant to support is completely lost. We have allowed the spirit of kishif to be stolen by accepting cheap substitutes. And the diligent witness has to remember the true meaning of these powerful verbs.
This profound mandate to investigate the universe with diligence naturally leads us to Section 3, the witnessing mandate as an ethical and legal responsibility. Our sources reiterate a powerful idea. The flow of actions in the Quran always begins with human agency.
This point is absolutely crucial for understanding our ethical mandate. God does not demand an action without first endowing us with the capacity to initiate it. Phrases like, if you help him, he will help you, or if you are grateful, I will give you more. They clearly show that the current of action is initiated by the human being.
The source called humanity the most mature fruit of 4 billion years of Ilahi Arj divine research and development. That implies incredible responsibility.
It does. We were given intellect, akal, will, iraid, conscience, vigdan, and consciousness, bulens. The Creator rightly expects conscious, willful action from this final mature product. Therefore, true witnessing, true Shahadah, demands high, exacting standards because of this divine investment.
So what are the specific components of that diligence, that high standard?
The source names 3 core components, which they group under the umbrella of hassasiyat, or diligence and precision. First, you must have farkan dilek, awareness, meaning knowing what is happening around you. Second, you need dikat, attention focus, meaning concentrating your energies on the details. And finally, hassayat, precision diligence, ensuring your observation is accurate and unbiased. A witness must not just look, but truly see, not just hear, but truly listen.
But the human witness is fallible. I mean, we make mistakes. Our senses betray us. What must we use to complete the act of witnessing when our eyes and ears fail?
That gap must be filled by the pure, unclouded vision of the Vijnan, the conscience. Conscience is the internal compass that completes the act of witnessing, ensuring that the gaps left by subjective sense data are closed with intellectual honesty, will, and moral clarity. A polluted conscience means a compromised Shahadah.
This refocuses even the most common religious actions, like starting an action with Bismillah, Bismillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim.
It completely reclaims it. Bismillah is not a magic charm used to gloss over questionable actions or, make the forbidden permissible. The source gives a pointed example, using Bismillah over a forbidden act or forbidden food. That's a corruption, a pretense.
So what is it then?
True Bismillah is an internal commitment to integrity. It's a declaration that I am about to proceed with my intellect, my will, and my conscience engaged, utilizing the utmost diligence and ethical precision. It is a commitment to true Shahadah in that specific action.
Now we come to one of the most profound ethical and legal takeaways from the concept of Shahadah, your avoidance of judgment. We are instructed to pray, "O Lord, write us among the witnesses." Why does this mandate automatically disqualify us from being the judge?
This is best understood through the negation of roles. In any classic legal system, you have 3 components: the judge, hakim, the defendant, sanak, and the witness. The prayer is a directive to humanity. Do not be the judge. Do not be the defendant. Be the witness.
And why is judging forbidden to the human being? What's the ethical danger there?
Judging others inherently implies a claim of ontological superiority. It's a claim that I, as a finite human, am better equipped to understand the truth of another human's heart, their action, their intent, than they are, or than God is. We simply do not possess that superiority.
So our role is to observe the external.
Exactly. Our mandate is to observe and testify honestly to what we see in the external realm of Shahadah, but never to penetrate and judge the absolute internal realm of Gaib in another person.
That distinction is powerful because it instantly defines our humble, vigilant role in the social and spiritual spheres. And this principle is so vividly illustrated in the anecdote of the Prophet and Usama bin Zaid.
This is the concrete ethical law being laid down. Usama, during a battle, killed an opponent who, at the moment of fear, declared his faith. Usama just assumed the man only declared his faith to save his own life.
Right.
And the Prophet's response was swift and absolute. He questioned Usama with immense force. Did you open his chest and look inside? The anger and the severity of that warning were designed to establish a permanent ethical boundary. You cannot judge the heart. Only God can. Your role is strictly to witness the external, the Shahadah. When you judge the interiority, you fail in your role as a witness, and you take on the role of the forbidden judge.
This focus on ethical action naturally leads to the source's fascinating reframing of din itself. We typically translate din as religion or way of life, but here it's defined primarily as a concept of hukuk, or law.
The linguistic trace here is profound. Din is traced back to dine, which means debt or obligation, and dayan, one who establishes law or legal authority. This makes the core of din fundamentally a legal and social framework that ensures justice, not just a system of individual spiritual practice.
So the measure of a community following din is its justice system, not its piety.
Absolutely. The source explains that a community becomes a medine, a city, a civilization, which is linguistically derived from the same root, not merely when it has a king or a political leader, but when the rule of law, hukukun ustulu, prevails, established by a dayan. Civilization, true Medine, is rooted in justice and law, not in wealth or military power.
And when we apply this to the concept of Yom el-Din, the day of law and justice, it gains a much deeper meaning than just the day of judgment.
Precisely. It is not merely the day of reckoning. Yevmul Hisaf is the calculation. It is the day when all rights are realized, when justice is established, or takukadisi. This phase of realization is not strictly limited to a future moment. The mandate to establish justice is an ongoing imperative for the vigilant witness in this world too.
And the need for Shahadah, for vigilance and precision, is what allows us to exercise the consciousness, the sure, required to truly distinguish between subtle shades of right and wrong.
Sure is key here. The source defines consciousness not just as the simple ability to distinguish good from bad, which even simple animals can do. Sure is the capacity to distinguish good from better and bad from less bad.
A finer perception.
A much finer perception. It's linked to linguistic terms symbolizing fineness and delicacy, like shir, poetry, fine speech, and share, fine hair. It's the ability to see the thinnest, most delicate differences in ethical reality. That fine perceptive awareness is required to be a diligent witness, the tanek, the one who tender illuminates the reality of the moment.
We have to pivot now to Section 4, which I think contains the most controversial and politically charged claim in the source material, the corruption of the word hit. The sources state emphatically that the word hit, which we all translate as martyr, has, and I'm quoting, zero connection to death in war in the Quran.
This is a radical claim. It challenges centuries of political, social, and cultural understanding. And I think we have to address the natural skepticism here. For many, the idea of martyrdom is interwoven with the very fabric of sacrifice and spirituality. Are the sources truly suggesting that this long-held concept, which has motivated generations, is based on a linguistic error?
It seems they are. They are arguing that the original living concept was abandoned and then replaced. I mean, if shahid means martyr, why is the concept applied to Allah 20 times? It's applied to the prophets and the angels. The source asks the critical rhetorical question, in which war did Allah die to earn that title?
It's a powerful point. So the term shahid originally meant model, example, or witness. It defines someone whose life and character were exemplary, a profound standard bearer. The source notes that the Quran does speak of those killed fighting for God's path, but it uses the descriptive phrase salila, those slain in the way of God. It never directly co-opts shahid to define them. The two concepts were distinct.
This semantic deviation is just astonishing, and the source references the Orientalist scholar Ignaz Goldziher, who seemingly observed this shift with disbelief.
Yeah, Goldziher was reportedly shocked that an entire civilization could abandon a perfectly clear living concept present in their foundational text, a concept related to life, integrity, and example, and instead replace it with an imported death-related meaning. They took a concept used for God and prophets and condemned it to death and political utility.
So if the meaning was originally witness model, where did the political corruption, the semantic tarif, come from?
The source attributes the shift to a clear political motive, likely during the Umayyad era, and specifically under Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan. The early Umayyad period was characterized by constant political and military struggle to consolidate power, and the ruling ideology desperately required men to die for their political cause.
And the easiest way to incentivize that death is to associate the ultimate reward, the highest spiritual status, with it.
Exactly. By systematically creating a powerful martyrdom literature centered on the highly respected living concept of shahid, they created an ironclad incentive structure for young men to sacrifice their lives, while, ironically, the ruling elite often ensured their own children remained safe and far from the front lines. The true shahid, the one who lived as an example of integrity, was replaced by the one who died politically.
This reframes the entire discussion on the sanctity of life and labor, or imek. The corruption championed death. The original concept championed life and ethical effort.
The source draws a direct connection between true witnessing and valuing life, which is understood as divine labor. This is why the phrase in the Quran, "I created with my hands," although it sounds anthropocentric, is explained as symbolizing the extraordinary value placed on imek.
This idea of divine labor reframes creation itself as a process, not just a snap command.
Indeed. The source insists that the phrase kun feyikun, be, and it is misleading if interpreted as instantaneous creation. Yakun is the imperfect tense. It implies an ongoing process, a state of becoming. God said be, and the process entered the stage of becoming. The focus is on the value and the effort invested, the divine R&D process itself, which took billions of years. If God values labor and life, then humanity must value honest labor and life.
And the Prophet provided the ultimate, most memorable example of elevating imik. The sources cite two specific non-political hands the Prophet is said to have kissed in his lifetime.
This is a beautiful contrast to the political death cult created later. He kissed the hand of his daughter Fatima, which was calloused from the strenuous daily labor of grinding grain for the family's bread, and he kissed the hand of Sa'ad bin Bakas, a companion whose hands were hard like wood from pulling water ropes for survival and for farming.
So he wasn't kissing status or power?
No, he was not kissing status, wealth, or old age. He was kissing imik. The ultimate witness elevates honest, productive labor and life, refusing to elevate political death.
Let's move into Section 5, where the rubber meets the road. We look at case studies in true and false witnessing, starting with the pinnacle of uncompromising integrity, Imam Abu Hanifa. His story is a powerful testimony against the political corruption we just discussed.
Abu Hanifa provides the starkest image of what true Shahadah moral witnessing looks like in the face of absolute power. He was the great jurist, revered across the Muslim world, and therefore an essential target for the ruling class who sought to legitimize their power. Caliph Abu Ja'far Mansur desperately wanted to co-opt that religious authority and offered him the ultimate prize, the position of Chief Justice.
Accepting that position would have granted him immense worldly power, but it would have legitimized a regime he viewed as corrupt.
Exactly. It was a moral trap. It was a means for the regime to purchase Mashrulah legitimacy. And Abu Hanifa's refusal was unwavering. He famously stated that he would rather count the mosque gates than accept a position that would force him to rubber stamp the actions of a tyrannical caliph. He prioritized integrity, true Shahadah over political power and safety.
And this refusal cost him his life. And this wasn't a quick death, it was sustained persecution.
He was imprisoned. During an earlier conflict under Governor Ibn Hubayra, he chose to suffer 100 lashings per day, rather than comply with the regime's demands. He was over 70 years old when he was finally beaten to death in Mansur's palace. The ultimate testament to his uncompromising spine, his omurga, was his final wish. He asked to be buried in land that was ethically clean, land that had not been unjustly confiscated.
Wow. Even in death, his final act was Shahadah against prevailing injustice. His very burial place was a testimony to his principles.
Now, let's contrast this ultimate integrity with the actions of the ruling power itself. The dark incident involving Abdullah ibn Masud, an early companion and dedicated witness to the core text.
Right. Abdullah ibn Masud was a symbol of intellectual courage. He was the man who first publicly read the Quran in Mecca and suffered severe beatings for that act of public witnessing. Yet his final tragic suffering occurred later, inside the Prophet's own mosque in Medina.
This happened under the reign of the third caliph, Uthman. The source recounts the horrifying political violence. Uthman, giving the Friday sermon, pointed at Ibn Masud when he entered and publicly called him the instigator of sedition. His men immediately descended upon Ibn Masud, dragging him out and administering a brutal beating right there, which resulted in the rupturing of his internal organs. He died days later.
And what was his crime that elicited such brutality?
His crime was refusing to surrender his personal copy of the Quran during the official compilation process. He viewed it as a symbolic act of intellectual and spiritual submission to state control over ideas. He refused to cede his personal knowledge and witness to the state, and the political establishment attacked him for protecting his conscience.
When you look at this, the contrast is just so stark. The source asks us, the listener, to decide who is the true witness, the Tanek, and who is the defendant, the Sanek, in that horrible scene.
Ibn Masud, beaten for protecting an idea, demonstrated the ultimate helplessness, the axiate, of pure principle against brute force. His death was his final Shahadah, his testimony against a tyranny that sought to control not just people, but the very text of God.
These examples show true witnessing, but the powerful often attempt to counterfeit this ideal. Let's look at some examples of false and performative Shahadah.
Muawiyah, who eventually seized control and established the Umayyad dynasty, was acutely aware of his lack of organic legitimacy. He essentially bought the caliphate from Hassan bin Ali. So to compensate, he sought physical symbols of holiness. During his inauguration, he sat on his newly constructed throne, wearing the Prophet's cloak.
A cloak he bought?
A cloak he had purchased from the heir of the poet Ka'b bin Zuhair for a massive sum of 30,000 dirhams.
So he was trying to acquire legitimacy through a financial transaction.
Exactly. This was Shahidlik fake witnessing. He attempted to validate his purchased caliphate by draping himself in purchased holiness, hoping the physical symbol would provide the moral authority he lacked.
We see a similar, though perhaps more tragic, pretense in the chief hypocrite of Medina, Abdullah bin Ubay.
Abdullah bin Ubay, the man who spent his life spreading malicious rumors and sedition, including the false rumors about the prophet's wife, requested to be buried in the prophet's own garment upon his death. And the prophet, with immense personal compassion and kindness, granted the request.
But that wasn't the end of the story.
No. The subsequent Quranic revelation still condemned him utterly, forbidding prayers for him at his grave.
That is a critical distinction. The physical act of compassion by the prophet was personal, but the divine ethical judgment remained absolute.
It demonstrates that physical proximity to holiness, even being wrapped in the prophet's own cloth, cannot redeem a life lived in spiritual pretense. Abdullah bin Ubay was playing to the stands, even in death, trying to use the prophet's garment as a shield, but the divine judgment on his lack of integrity, his false witnessing, was unwavering.
To end this section on a note of transformation, let's look at the ultimate reversal of witnessing. Suhail bin Amr.
Suhail was the leader of the Quraysh diplomatic team at Hudaybiyah, famous for his staunch antagonism toward the prophet. He fought bitterly over the language of the treaty, demanding that the title Muhammad, Messenger of God, be physically struck out and replaced simply with Muhammad. He represented the ultimate obstruction to recognizing the truth.
But his later life was a complete 180-degree turn.
It was. During the farewell pilgrimage, after he had finally embraced Islam, Suhail was observed during the ritual of shaving the prophet's head to exit the state of ritual purity. Suhail was on the ground, collecting every single falling strand of the prophet's hair with utter devotion. It was a complete reversal of his public witnessing from the chief diplomatic antagonist who refused to acknowledge the title to the humble follower who treasured the smallest physical part of the messenger. It shows the transformative power of genuine Shahadah over entrenched prejudice and political opposition. So, to summarize this entire exploration, the profound lesson of Shahadah is that our fundamental purpose here is to acquire knowledge and live ethically, not by retreating into the unknowable realm of Kaib, but by being acutely aware, vigilant, and intensely ethical in the observable world of Shahadah. We were equipped with consciousness and conscience for a reason.
We have to internalize that crucial saying that summarizes the entire project of these sources.
We came to this world to be witnesses, Shahid ul-Maya, not to be owners, Sahib ul-Maya. The failure of historical Muslim cultures was rooted in the precise moment they shifted their ethical focus from being witnesses, observing the truth, upholding justice, to trying to be owners. Owners of the land, of the power, and even of the divine concepts themselves.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's leave you with one final provocative thought rooted in the source material, which points to the Buruj Surah, the Surah of the Constellations, which is specifically referred to as a Surah of Witnessing, Vishahidin Vemashud.
That surah speaks explicitly of the oppression endured by the people of the ditch and, by extension, of witnessing the oppressed and the oppressors. If witnessing requires that fine distinction, that sure to see the good and the bad, the beautiful and the terrifying, then the knowledge we have explored today demands a renewal of your integrity. You must fulfill your oath to observe honestly and precisely.
The ultimate test of the true meaning of Shahadah is this. Are you acting as a witness to your time, observing your world and your society with vikdan, with conscience and hassasiyat, with precision? Or are you blinded by inherited, corrupted definitions, acting as the judge of others, or simply a passive observer? The knowledge we've explored today demands you choose the path of the vigilant witness.
Welcome back. Today we're looking at a really deep theological piece on the concept of Shahadah, or witnessing.
Yeah, a really strong one. It argues that Quranic knowledge is two-footed based on the unseen, gaib, and the observable, Shahadah.
And it goes right after traditions that brought in this idea of conjecture, or zan.
It's a fantastic thesis. I mean, the argument that a lot of Islamic theology imported this third prosthetic leg, as the author calls it.
That's a great phrase.
It is, that it cripples genuine belief. It's just tremendously insightful.
Absolutely. But, even with a foundation this strong, the way it's presented has to carry that force all the way through to the reader.
And that's where we should start. Let's talk about the architecture of the argument first.
Okay, so anchoring these big philosophical concepts means you have to manage the digressions, even when they're compelling.
I see exactly what you're getting at. I mean, the author does a magnificent job setting up the main idea, this dual epistemology of gaib and Shahadah.
And the whole imperative for kashif, for discovery, as this this divinely mandated act.
For sure. The case for rejecting zan is made so powerfully because it shows how it just dilutes the intellectual and ethical commitment that Shahadah demands.
But the structural risk, and this is the weakness we found, is when the argument gets bogged down in these very detailed, very specific anecdotes or scholarly tangents.
Individually, they're fascinating.
Oh, completely. But they fracture the main philosophical flow.
That's it. That's the weakness. They draw focus away from the core argument about Shahadah being this, rigorous scientific and moral mandate.
Take the part about lucid dreaming.
Or the extended story about the Afghan student's prayer posture.
The finger movement, right?
Yeah, these are rich moments. They add a lot of texture, but you risk the listener just losing the thread, losing that high-stakes philosophical argument about the role of the witness.
But don't you think some of that texture is necessary? I mean, it helps to humanize what is, at its heart, a pretty radical critique of theology.
They absolutely do. And the suggestion here isn't to just cut them all out.
Okay.
The suggestion for improvement is more about streamlining or resequencing them. The goal is to make sure that if they're used, they immediately and explicitly reinforce the main point.
So the focus stays laser sharp on the intellectual journey of the shahid, the witness.
Exactly. Otherwise, they just feel like self-indulgent detours,
We need to treat them less like historical context and more like immediate evidence for the thesis.
Yes. And a great concrete example of this is all the science that gets brought in. The part about the neurological function of the frontal lobe and the book recommendation, Düştügemasu.
Right. That comes at a point where the theological argument is already pretty dense.
And if those neurological details are really essential, which, they could be, for illustrating the kind of consciousness a true witness needs,
then they need to be tied in much more tightly.
Immediately, you'd follow that point with an explicit tieback. Something like, this neurological detail shows us precisely how the conscious mind has to engage the observable world, the Shahadah.
Without letting lower instincts corrupt the vikdan, the conscience, which is the final censor for the witness.
Exactly. That small change transforms it from just like an interesting piece of trivia into powerful support for the argument.
It justifies its own place in the structure.
And without that explicit bridge, you're just presenting a cool fact instead of a necessary piece of evidence. That tightening would really maximize the force of the whole critique.
Okay, that makes sense. So, we've talked about the structure, where the ideas sit. Let's talk about how the core concepts connect to each other.
Right. This is our second point. Unifying the actionable mandate requires stronger conceptual bridges between the redefined theological terms.
And the author is incredibly skilled here. They reclaim these crucial terms, shahid for witness, keshif for discovery, tasbih for glorification.
And gives them these powerful new interpretations that really challenge centuries of religious culture. I think this is probably the most exciting part of the piece.
I agree. What really elevates it is the intellectual courage, like redefining tasbih not as just chanting or, turning beads,
but as acting according to one's creation purpose.
It's a huge shift. And the claim that emek, effort, labor, conscious work, is an attribute of God, referencing the I created with my hands expression, that's profound.
It is. The weakness, though, is that while these ideas are introduced as these powerful, standalone concepts, they sometimes feel a little isolated.
A bit disconnected from each other.
Yes. The material moves so fast through these brilliant definitions, but it doesn't fully show how a practicing shahid is supposed to use them together in their daily life.
So if you introduce 3 or 4 of these radically challenging ideas, like the new tasbih and the divine nature of emek,
right,
without a strong thread connecting them, the listener might see the whole critique as just a scattered list of separate theological errors.
Right, instead of one unified, actionable failure of modern belief. It feels like it's missing a kind of operational manual for the witness. Go role.
And contrast them with the cultural corruptions being criticized.
Exactly. And we think emek needs to be that anchor for both scientific kashif and for moral purity in the observable world.
That makes a lot of sense. If you show that God values the process, the effort, the emek, then the mandate for Shahadah naturally demands intellectual and physical labor.
It totally changes the reader's relationship to how they acquire knowledge.
And building on that, the concrete examples need to hammer that connection home. So when you present the idea that emek is linked to God,
You have to immediately pivot and connect that to the critique of how discovery, kashif, is treated.
like it's a superstition, pulling a rabbit out of a hat, as the author puts it.
Or just relying on blind faith, in miracles, in karamat. That contrast is vital.
Because it shifts the whole thing from being just a theological correction to being a call for real intellectual commitment.
The material needs to state it explicitly. True Shahadah requires conscious, labor-intensive pursuit of knowledge in the observable world.
And then you can use those historical figures the author brings up, like El-Battani in astronomy or Jabir bin Hayyan in chemistry, as proof.
They aren't just names to drop. They are proof that genuine Islamic discovery is the validation of ilm within the Shahadah mandate.
So the emphasis moves from idle faith, from waiting for signs, to rigorous, continuous work.
That's crucial. It gives the listener a clear, actionable mandate. The critique of Zahn works because it systematically undervalues emek, and that undermines the intellectual work Shahadah actually demands.
Yes, it just raises the stakes of the entire argument.
Absolutely. It transitions the work from being just a critique of theology to being like a blueprint for spiritual intellectual action.
Okay, let's move to the final major area of opportunity. This has to do with the ending.
The close. The moral climax has to be maximized by strategically curating the final examples.
The material concludes with this extremely powerful distinction, that humanity came to this world to be a witness, a shahid or tanik, not a judge, a hakim, and definitely not an owner, a sahib. It's the perfect capstone for the whole argument.
That final statement, we came to this world to be witnesses, not owners. It should be breathtaking, but the conclusion needs a little refining to get there.
Right. The problem, the weakness, is that the ending just throws so many historical contrasts at you in rapid succession.
The clash between Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Usman, Muawiyah buying the Prophet's cloak, Suhail bin Arm's shifting allegiance.
Individually, there are all these powerful little micro-narratives.
But throwing them all together like that so densely, it risks reducing the impact of that final moral punchline. It becomes a torrent of evidence instead of a single focused crescendo.
So is the author trying to show historical breadth, but maybe at the cost of emotional depth in the conclusion?
It feels that way. So the suggestion is to focus the end on the single highest stakes moral conflict, the one that perfectly embodies that witness versus judge dichotomy.
Make it not just historical, but ethically actionable.
Yes, use the ultimate refusal of power as the final proof of being a true witness.
That makes a lot of sense. If you prioritize the story of someone who explicitly and dramatically rejected the role of the judge, the moral stakes for the reader just go through the roof.
It crystallizes the whole theme.
And for a concrete example, we should prioritize the narrative of Imam Abu Hanifa. The material mentions him, but only briefly.
His story is a perfect model of principled Shahadah. He chose torture and death under the ruler Ibn Hubaydah, 100 lashings a day, rather than accept a judicial post.
Because accepting that post would have meant legitimizing an oppressive system. It would mean trading his status as a witness for that of a judge, an owner.
And his final wish, this is the perfect detail, to be buried in non-usurped land. It's the ultimate symbolic rejection of ownership and the whole system of the judge.
It links the entire philosophical argument back to this ultimate act of refusal.
That one specific example provides the profound ethical climax the argument deserves. Choosing death over compromising the integrity of your witness, that's it.
It makes the argument deeply personal, universal. It's the ultimate illustration of emek in the moral realm, right? The hardest labor is remaining uncorrupted.
Use that narrative as the springboard. Let the power of Abu Hanifa's refusal carry the momentum right into that final potent slogan. We came to this world to be witnesses, not owners.
Focusing on that one curated, high-stakes example lets the work end not with a list of historical facts, but with this ultimate, uncompromising statement of moral defiance.
All rooted in the correct understanding of Shahadah.
That level of focus would just elevate the emotional and moral weight of the conclusion so much. It would make the final message unforgettable.
The core work here is so challenging and essential. It's a necessary intervention in theological discourse.
So, to summarize, we've got 3 main opportunities for revision, all centered on increasing the focus and flow of this already exceptional piece.
First, structurally, streamline the philosophical arguments. Manage those insightful but distracting digressions. Make them reinforce the core Shahadah mandate, not fracture it.
Second, conceptually, create stronger unity for the redefined concepts, specifically using emek, labor, and tasbih, purposeful action, as the unified foundation for the intellectual work that Kashif demands.
And finally, maximize the dramatic and moral impact of the close. Focus the historical examples to deliver a single powerful crescendo. Prioritize Imam Abu Hanifa's uncompromising stance.
His refusal of judicial authority perfectly captures that tension between being a witness and becoming a judge or an owner.
This is an exceptionally strong foundation. We highly encourage you to implement these structural and focus-based critiques and submit the work back to us.
We are really eager to see the next iteration of this essential philosophical work.
Until next time, keep writing, keep challenging, and keep improving.
Welcome to The Debate. Today we're confronting a really massive, yet often obscured question in the architecture of Quranic thought. Our subject is Shahadah, witnessing or testimony. Its significance is just undeniable. The root appears nearly 160 times, and Allah is explicitly named Shahid, the witness, 20 times.
And that linguistic and theological density, it really compels us to reconsider our fundamental approach to knowledge. So the core debate for us today is this. Does this profound emphasis on Shahadah mean we have to shift our intellectual starting point? Moving from, say, the contemplation of the divine essence, ilahiyat, to prioritizing the study of the observable world and human action, Shahadah and insaniyat.
I would assert that this shift isn't just necessary, it's practically commanded. True human understanding has to begin with the observable world, with human experience, precisely because God is ghaib, absolute, unseen, and, completely beyond our sensory or empirical reach. We have to start where our tools, our intellect, our observation are actually effective.
And I'll argue that while that focus on Shahadah is absolutely vital for human development, both ethically and intellectually, framing this as a shift away from the foundational role of ilahiyat, well, it risks creating a false dichotomy. We have to respect the comprehensive duality that's inherent in the text and acknowledge the ultimate witness who really defines the reality of that entire witness realm.
My position really rests on the inherent limits of human knowledge when it comes to the divine. Allah is described as absolute, limitless, infinite, and fundamentally ghaib, the unseen. We simply cannot subject the divine essence to human analysis or empirical testing or, scientific scrutiny. It just doesn't work. Therefore, our relationship to ghaib has to be one of iman, this absolute foundational belief that lies completely outside the sphere of empirical verification. This structure implies a dual knowledge system, which is articulated so clearly in the statement that Allah is alimul ghaibi wa shahada, the knower of the unseen and the witnessed. Now, for human beings engaging in our intellectual endeavor, we can only operate legitimately using the leg that's available and accessible to us, Shahadah, the created, witnessed realm. And what's more, the text constantly places the impetus for change and action on humanity. The divine flow often follows human initiative. Just recall that principle, if you help him, he will help you. We were given intellect, aql, a conscious will, irade, and a keen awareness, bilinch. These capacities are an explicit divine invitation for us to engage in kashif, the active discovery of the universe, the alam, which is fundamentally designed to be knowable, bilinnable. To ignore this command, to not actively know the witnessed realm, is to basically abandon half of the entire epistemological framework.
I find the emphasis on active human kashif very compelling and necessary, I do. But I find the assertion that we must shift away from ilahiyat to be frankly dangerously misleading. The potential pitfall here, the real danger,
is the emergence of an excessively anthropocentric view of reality. One where the human mind, operating only within the witnessed realm, then tries to define the ultimate meaning of existence all by itself. The text names Allah Shahid 20 times. This isn't just a passive observer. This title indicates the ultimate source and guarantor of reality itself. The realm of Shahadah isn't independent. It's inherently sustained and defined by the divine witness. So if we start to minimize the ultimate witness, we risk losing the profound integrity of the witnessed world. My deepest concern is conceptual erosion, especially for concepts that transcend our immediate empirical grasp, like the Ghaib of the afterlife. The text warns us that the corruption of Islamic epistemology happens when zan, which can range from, simple conjecture to outright false opinion, is introduced as a kind of third prosthetic leg to supplement that dual system of Ghaib and Shahadah. If we diminish the spiritual foundation, we risk replacing true iman with human speculation, with toxic zan, rather than with anchored, real knowledge or Shahadah.
Okay, we absolutely agree on the structural toxicity of that third prosthetic leg of zan. It represents an intellectual contamination, often imported from external philosophical or theological traditions, that tried to bridge that absolute divide between human knowledge and the divine. The source is crystal clear. Zan, in its negative sense, contains nothing of the truth. This draws a really rigorous parallel to that ancient Greek distinction. We have to choose episteme, demonstrable knowledge, and utterly reject doxa, which is just mere opinion or conjecture. If we accept the premise that iman is the appropriate absolute response to Ghaib, then zan has no role in knowledge acquisition at all. None. Knowledge has to be rigorously sought in the realm of Shahadah. The moment we try to use human speculation, whether you want to label it conviction or high probability, to bridge the gap toward the unseen, we just confuse belief with knowing.
See, I disagree fundamentally with that rigid interpretation of the textual nuance. While I abhor the kind of bad sense on speculation and baseless assumption that plagued later theological discourse, we have to look at the source's own balanced usage. The text speaks, for instance, of those who assume or are convinced they will meet their Lord. Now here, zan is employed not as reckless guesswork, but as a deep, informed conviction, kanat, that shapes their actions. So how do we account for the entirety of faith? If we confine ourselves strictly to the empirical, how do we intellectually engage with the promise and terror of the afterlife, which is entirely ghaib, and can only be described through mikaz, through metaphor? Your framework, with all due respect, leaves us intellectually impoverished when it comes to these crucial matters.
Doesn't the comprehensive nature of faith demand a profound conviction that while it rests on the absolute integrity of iman, moves beyond the immediate empirical data of Shahadah?
I find that assertion problematic. I really do, because it risks opening the door to the very speculation we just agreed has to be avoided. The conviction you're talking about, the qanat, that is the fruit of sound iman and ethical Shahadah. It isn't a form of knowledge itself. The human obligation is to confirm the truth within the visible world. When we achieve maximum integrity in our witnessing and our action, in our Shahadah, that is what validates our absolute belief, our iman in the unseen. We have to anchor conviction in the integrity of our Shahadah, not in trying to bridge the gap to Ghaib. Our mandate is intellectual rigor and discovery in the cosmos. That is what the visible world demands of us.
Okay, so if our intellectual effort has to focus on the witnessed realm of Shahadah, then how does this demand for objective knowledge translate directly into the ethical and legal structure of deen? Let's try to ground this abstract epistemology in, practical reality. The foundational text makes a really striking argument that deen, which we often translate as religion, is not primarily a theological or spiritual concept. It's fundamentally a legal and ethical one. It's derived from the root meaning of dayan, which signifies debt, repayment, law. So deen is hukuk, law, and akhlaq, morality or behavior. This means the integrity of our Shahadah isn't just about abstract intellectual discovery. It's about concrete commitment and action, manifesting not just as, verbalism, sözcülük, but as embodied law and morality.
I agree completely. That focus on deen as law and ethics is crucial, and it perfectly illuminates the ethical core of Shahadah. The most powerful social application of witnessing is the ethical rejection of two specific roles in human relations, that of the judge, hakim or yargich, and that of the accused, sunnik. We as humans are called to be witnesses, shahed or tunnik, exclusively. And why is this distinction so critical? Because judgment implies an ontological superiority, the ability to look into someone's soul or their ultimate intent, which is a quality reserved for the divine. For a human to assume the role of judge over another is, in essence, to claim divinity. We are mandated to observe and testify to the visible action, the Shahadah, and to refrain from judging the internal state. I mean, just remember the Prophet's famous rebuke to Usama bin Zaid. After Usama killed an opponent who had just uttered the declaration of faith to save his life, the Prophet asked him, "Did you open his chest and look inside?" This establishes the profound limit of human moral jurisdiction. We witness the action, we do not judge the heart. And this principle extends to our spiritual practice itself. We have to reject the cultural distortion of tesbih, of glorification, as just the ritual of counting beads, and embrace its profound original definition, acting in precise accordance with the purpose of one's creation. The text confirms this functional definition. There is nothing in the universe that does not glorify Allah with His praise. The tree glorifies through photosynthesis, the atom through its structured existence, and humanity glorifies through conscious, purposeful action, through Shahadah. True glorification is functional witnessing.
Right, and that functional definition of tesbih is so powerful because it underscores the proactive nature of Shahadah. If everything is a functional witness, then humanity's unique form of witnessing, which is driven by aql and irade, it has to be intellectual discovery or keshf. Culturally, keshf has often been corrupted, hasn't it? Reduced to this magical idea of a miracle or a rabbit from a hat, keramet, which is just antithetical to honest intellectual work. But the true Quranic meaning of keshf is the systematic, rigorous process of uncovering the laws of the alam. And this is precisely what defined the Muslim scientific golden age. You think of al-Battani refining astronomical measurements, al-Khwarizmi formalizing algebra, and especially the chemist Jabir bin Hayyan. Hayyan's true contribution was arguing fiercely against the false science of alchemy, the search for magical shortcuts, and for chemistry, which demands honest, repeated, and rigorous observation of the witnessed realm. This conscious intellectual witnessing, this shuon labakmak, is the highest expression of Shahadah in the visible world.
But that intellectual rigor always has to be viewed through the lens of moral integrity. Otherwise, it just risks becoming another tool for oppression. To really understand the demanding nature of Shahadah, we have to address the historical corruption of the concept itself. The source material meticulously details what it calls semantic distortion, or semantic tahrif. The living, dynamic meaning of Shahad was illicitly shifted from witness, life, action, integrity, to exclusively mean martyr, death, a profound act of intellectual violence, likely institutionalized during the Umayyad period, perhaps under figures like Abdul Malik bin Marwan. And why was this distortion necessary? Well, to serve a political ideology that required men to die unquestioningly for the state's political ambitions. The absurdity of this narrow definition is immediately evident when we just consider the context. Allah is called Shahid 20 times, the prophets are called Shahid, the angels are called Shahid. These are concepts fundamentally linked to life, to observation, to existence. By confining the concept to battlefield death, its primary ethical and intellectual force was, well, it was effectively neutralized.
Yes, I wholeheartedly concur on the tragedy of that semantic distortion. It replaced a call for a conscious, active life with an expectation of a passive death. But this historical context further supports the need to champion the integrity of intellectual kashif. The only real defense against the political corruption of concepts is rigorous, honest witnessing of reality. Look, when Jabir bin Hayyan rejected alchemy, he wasn't just doing science. He was demonstrating intellectual Shahadah. He was refusing to use conjecture or false opinion, zan, and insisting on empirical truth. The search for the philosopher's stone was fundamentally a search for a magical shortcut, a corruption very similar to the political shortcuts taken by the Umayyads. True science, like true faith, demands integrity and patience in witnessing.
And that integrity has to extend beyond the lab bench to the halls of power. We have to distinguish between true, principled witnessing and false political maneuvering. I mean, consider the case of Abdullah ibn Masud. When Caliph Uthman standardized the Quran, Ibn Masud, who believed his personal copy was the most authentic, he refused to hand it over. This act of principled, conscious witnessing, preserving what he believed was the truth, led to him being beaten to death in the mosque. That is pure Shahadah in action, integrity regardless of the cost. Now contrast that with the story of Muawiyah, purchasing the Prophet's cloak for an astronomical 30,000 dirhams just to legitimize his rule, an act of political theater disguised as piety. This is false witnessing, using symbols to mask political ambition. Shahadah, in the ethical sense, demands absolute integrity and shuur, that profound consciousness that enables us to distinguish between good and better, or bad and less bad, in our motives and our actions. It's the ability to witness the truth, even when that truth contradicts our own self-interest.
So, to summarize my position, the intellectual current we're advocating for shifts the emphasis of theological inquiry back toward human responsibility within the created world. We came to this world to be witnesses, shahid, not owners, sahib. Our actions are the logical extension of our thoughts, and those thoughts are guided by our conscious perception. The essence of faith, then, is to ensure the integrity and consciousness of our witnessing, compelling us to focus our intellectual and ethical energy on the accessible, verifiable realm of Shahadah. And my summary remains the enduring importance of that duality. The path forward demands the integration of deep intellectual inquiry and discovery, kashif, within the realm of Shahadah, a real commitment to honest witnessing, durust while simultaneously maintaining a profound respect for the absolute nature of Ghaib and the ultimate witness, Shaheed. If we lose sight of that divine starting point, our human witnessing loses its frame and risks sliding into mere humanistic opinion.
The obligation is clear. Stop being judges of one another and instead focus on the demanding yet achievable obligation of being a conscious, ethical, and active witness in the created world.
Indeed. And by exploring these complex, multifaceted concepts critically, this tension between the seen and the unseen, between action and belief, we deepen our understanding of both the foundational text and our own crucial role within the cosmos. The intellectual richness derived from exploring these positions is, I think, the true reward.